I was sitting in a Zoom call with 12 people, including the CEO, when I saw my name highlighted in red on a shared spreadsheet I didn't authorize. The lead architect, a guy named Greg who always smelled like stale coffee and expensive leather, cleared his throat and told everyone that the 3-week delay was entirely because my external code hadn't been delivered. I felt a cold, sharp drop in my stomach, like I was falling in an elevator, and my mouse cursor started shaking so hard I had to grip the desk with both hands. I looked at the pending status next to my name and then at the sent folder in my email where those exact files had been sitting for 20 days, and I realized Greg wasn't just making a mistake, he was looking for a sacrificial lamb. I didn't move my head or blink. I just felt the blood rushing to my ears until all I could hear was the dull thudding of my own pulse. That money from this contract was supposed to pay for my mother's surgery next month, and Greg was sitting there calmly trying to get me fired to cover his own tracks. I didn't say a word yet. I just hit the request screen share button while my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Like and subscribe if you've ever been blamed for someone else's mess. Working as a contractor for this firm felt like being a ghost that only people noticed when they wanted someone to kick. I'd walk into the break room and the conversation would just die, leaving only the sound of the industrial fridge humming and the squeak of my shoes on the linoleum. Greg was the golden boy of the department, always leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his head, making jokes about how the outside help was probably just Googling the answers. I kept my head down, focusing on the boring back-end stuff they were too lazy to touch, and I made sure every single line of code was time-stamped and backed up on 3 different servers. I noticed Greg started missing the morning stand-ups, or he'd show up late with bloodshot eyes, smelling like he'd spent the night at a casino. Every time I asked for an approval signature, he'd just wave me off and tell me to stop bothering the real employees. I started BCCing my personal email on every request, not because I was smart, but because I was tired of the way he'd smirk at me whenever the project lead asked for an update. I felt this constant, dull ache in my jaw from grinding my teeth every time he talked over me in meetings, treating me like a desk lamp instead of a person. The office always had this smell of burnt popcorn and ozone from the server room, and every time I smelt it, I felt my shoulders hunch up to my ears. I'd spend hours documenting my progress in the Jira tickets, adding screenshots with the system clock visible, even though no one ever commented on them. Greg would walk past my desk and tap on my monitor with his knuckles, a sharp, annoying sound, asking if I was actually working or just looking at recipes. I'd just nod and look at my keyboard, watching the letters fade from where my fingers pressed too hard. I knew the project was slipping because I could see the API logs showing 0 activity from Greg's team for days at a time. I saw him in the parking lot once, leaning against his car and talking low into his phone, looking around like he was afraid of being seen. He had this way of clicking his tongue when he was annoyed that made my skin feel tight and itchy. I didn't say anything to HR because I needed the paycheck for my mom's medical bills, and as a contractor, I knew I was expendable. I just kept my logs clean and my eyes on the floor, waiting for the project to finish so I could leave that building forever. Like and subscribe if you've worked with someone who thought they were untouchable. The status meeting was supposed to be a routine check-in, but the air felt heavy and humid, the way it does right before a thunderstorm. Greg waited until the CEO joined the call to announce that the project was stalling out because of the contractor's lack of organization. He showed a faked log where my tasks looked incomplete, and I could feel the collective gaze of the upper management shifting toward my little square on the screen. My face felt hot, like I was standing too close to a fire, and for a second I couldn't even remember how to breathe. I watched him lie with this casual, relaxed tone, even leaning back and sipping from a world's best boss mug while he dismantled my reputation. I looked at the spreadsheet he was sharing, and I noticed the date modified column was hidden, which is a classic move when you're trying to hide when a file was actually touched. My hands were so cold, they felt like blocks of wood as I navigated to my own local drive. Then, Lily, my daughter, walked into my home office to ask for a juice box, and she looked at the screen and said, "Mommy, why is that man using the red color on your homework?" That little, blunt question from a 5-year-old made the fog in my head just snap clear. I realized he hadn't checked the metadata on the files he was showing, or he assumed I was too scared to call him out in front of the big bosses. I looked at the CEO's face on the screen. His forehead was wrinkled and he was tapping a pen against his chin, looking like he was already deciding to let me go. Greg started talking about how outside contractors don't have the same skin in the game as full-time staff, and he actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that made my stomach turn. I felt a bead of sweat roll down my side, and I realized that if I didn't speak now, my mom wasn't getting her surgery and my career was over. I didn't get angry. I just felt this weird, icy calm take over my body, the kind of quiet you get after a heavy snowfall when everything sounds muffled. I moved my mouth to the share screen button and waited for Greg to finish his sentence about my unreliability. I could hear my own breathing in the headset, loud and shaky, but I didn't close my eyes. Like and subscribe to see the receipts come out. I didn't argue with him or raise my voice. I just opened the master project tracker and sorted the view by modified date and access logs while everyone watched in silence. I clicked on the files Greg said were missing, and the screen showed they had been opened by his account 16 days ago, and then I showed the 16 follow-up emails I'd sent that he never answered. The silence on the call was so thick, you could hear the digital white noise, and Greg's smug expression just started to melt, his skin turning a blotchy, uneven pink that matched the pending cells on his fake sheet. I read out the dates and the timestamps in a flat, monotone voice, not adding any commentary, just letting the numbers hit the air like stones. I showed the server logs that proved Greg hadn't logged in to review the code since the month began, despite his claims of daily checks. The CEO asked Greg one question about why he lied, and Greg started stuttering, his voice going an octave higher, contradicting himself 3 times in 30 seconds while he fumbled with his headset. I just sat there, watching my cursor hover over the close button, feeling the tension drain out of my shoulders as the project lead took over the call and removed Greg's access to the main branch. I didn't feel happy, I just felt exhausted, like I'd just finished a 12-hour shift in the sun. A week later, I got an automated notification from the HR portal that my contract was being extended to lead the whole integration, and a separate memo went out about internal staffing changes. I saw Greg's desk being cleared out by a security guard 2 days later, and he was carrying his world's best boss mug in a brown cardboard box, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He didn't look at me as he walked toward the elevator, and I didn't look at him either. I just kept typing, focusing on the click-clack of the mechanical keyboard. My mom got her surgery 3 weeks later, and the bill was paid in full by the bonus I got for hitting the new deadline. I still work there, and the office still smells like burnt popcorn, but now people actually wait for me to finish speaking before they start. I learned that you don't need to bark at a dog that's already caught in its own trap. You just have to keep the door locked. I don't feel like a hero. I just feel like someone who finally got to finish their work in peace.